The blood on Elena Graves's hands had long since dried, but the stain on her soul felt fresh as the day she had fired that bullet 3 years ago in the winter of 1876. She stood at the edge of Walla Walla, Washington, watching dust devils dance across the late summer plains, knowing that no amount of distance could outrun what she had done. The letter in her pocket, creased and worn from constant folding, held her mother's final words written just before consumption took her last breath. "You will never be forgiven for what you did, Elena. Not by God, not by this family, not by anyone who knows the truth." Elena had been 19 when it happened, barely more than a girl, working as a seamstress in Portland while her father drank away what little money they had. The merchant's son had cornered her in the back room of the shop, his hands rough and insistent, his breath reeking of whiskey and entitlement. She had grabbed the scissors first, but he had knocked them away. The gun had been in her employer's desk drawer, kept there for protection against thieves. When she pulled the trigger, she had not meant to kill him. She had only wanted him to stop, to let her go, to see her as human rather than something to be taken. But the bullet had found his heart, and he had died on that wooden floor while she stood trembling, unable to comprehend what her hands had done. The trial had been swift and brutal. The merchant's family had money and influence, and Elena had neither. Her lawyer, a tired man who smelled of cheap tobacco, had barely mounted a defense. But the judge, an elderly man with kind eyes who had listened to every word of her testimony, had seen something that others had not. He had ruled it self-defense, though his voice had been heavy with the knowledge that this verdict would cost him politically. Elena had walked free from the courthouse, but she had not been free at all. The merchant's widow had stood on the steps and pronounced her judgment for all to hear. "You are a murderer, and you will carry that mark until the day you die. No decent person will ever accept you." Her family had turned their backs immediately. Her father had looked at her with such disgust that she had felt it like a physical blow. Her mother had wept and called her a disgrace to their name. Her 2 younger sisters had been forbidden from speaking to her, though Sarah, the middle child, had slipped her a handful of coins and whispered a tearful goodbye. Elena had left Portland that same night, taking only what she could carry, and had spent the next 3 years drifting from town to town, working whatever jobs would have her, until someone inevitably learned her story and she was forced to move on again. Walla Walla had seemed like it might be different. The small town nestled in the valley was growing, fed by wheat farms and cattle ranches, and there was enough work that people did not ask too many questions. Elena had found employment at the general store, sweeping floors and stocking shelves, and had taken a tiny room above the saloon that cost more than it was worth, but provided a roof and 4 walls. She kept her head down and her past buried, speaking only when necessary, existing rather than living. She had been in town for 2 weeks when she first saw Samuel Vaughn. He came into the general store on a Tuesday afternoon, his boots worn but well cared for, his hat pushed back to reveal sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water after rain. He was tall and lean in the way of men who spent their lives working the land, with hands that spoke of both gentleness and strength. He purchased rope, nails, and a bag of coffee, and when he counted out his money, Elena noticed the calluses on his fingers and the careful way he handled each coin, as though he knew the value of every cent. "Thank you, madam," he said, and his voice was quiet and respectful, with a drawl that suggested he had grown up somewhere south of Washington. Elena nodded without meeting his eyes, and he left without pressing for conversation. She thought nothing of it until he returned 3 days later for flour and salt, and then again 2 days after that for sugar and beans. Each time he was polite and unassuming, never lingering longer than necessary but always offering a good day or thank you kindly before departing. It was Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, who told her about Samuel Vaughn. "He has a ranch about 5 miles west of town," she said, measuring out fabric for a customer while she talked. "Lost his parents to fever when he was 16 and has been running that place by himself ever since. That was 8 years ago now. He is a good man, hardworking and honest, never causes trouble, always pays his debts. Half the unmarried women in this town have set their caps for him, but he has never shown interest in any of them. Some folks say he is married to that ranch of his." Elena listened, but did not comment. She had learned not to get involved in town gossip, not to form opinions about people she might have to leave behind at a moment's notice. But she found herself watching for Samuel Vaughn when he came into the store, noticing the way he always removed his hat indoors, the way he stepped aside to let others pass, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when Mrs. Henderson told him about her grandchildren. The first real conversation they had was born of necessity rather than choice. Elena was closing up the store one evening in early September when a late customer burst through the door, wild-eyed and frantic. "There has been an accident," the man gasped. "Wagon overturned on the North Road. Samuel Vaughn is hurt. We need bandages and carbolic acid, anything you have." Elena's hands moved automatically, gathering supplies while her mind raced. She had helped tend wounds before, had learned basic medical care from a doctor's wife in one of the towns where she had stayed. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough. His leg is trapped and there is a lot of blood. We got the wagon lifted, but he needs help now." Elena made a decision in an instant. She grabbed the medical supplies, locked the store behind her, and followed the man to where several others had gathered around Samuel Vaughn. He was conscious but pale, his jaw clenched against pain, his right leg bent at an angle that made Elena's stomach turn. Someone had already torn his pant leg away, revealing a deep gash that bled steadily despite the makeshift tourniquet above it. "Let me through," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. The men parted, and she knelt beside Samuel, meeting his eyes for the first time properly. Up close, she could see gold flecks in the gray-green, could see the way pain had drawn lines around his mouth. "This is going to hurt," she told him. "I need to clean it before we can stitch it." He nodded, his breathing shallow. "Do what you need to do." Elena worked quickly and methodically, pouring carbolic acid into the wound while Samuel bit down on the leather belt someone had given him. She could feel him trembling with the effort of staying still, could hear the muffled sounds he made despite his best efforts. The cut was deep but clean, and though it would scar, she did not think it would cost him the leg if they kept infection at bay. She stitched with small, precise movements, her hands remembering skills she had thought she had left behind. When she was finally done, she bandaged the leg tightly and sat back on her heels. "You need to see a proper doctor," she said. "This is just temporary, and you need to stay off this leg for at least a week, maybe 2. Samuel had released the belt from between his teeth, his face sheened with sweat. "Thank you," he said, and there was something in his eyes that made Elena look away. "I mean it. You might have just saved my leg." They carried him back to his ranch in the back of a borrowed wagon, and though Samuel protested that he would be fine alone, the men insisted someone needed to stay with him at least for the first night. Elena found herself volunteering before she could think better of it. She told herself it was because she knew how to watch for signs of fever, how to change bandages, how to keep a wound clean. She did not examine why her heart had lurched when she had first seen him lying there injured. Samuel's ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a small house that showed signs of careful repair and a barn that housed 4 horses and a milk cow. The men helped him inside and onto his bed, then left with promises to check on him the next day. Elena found herself alone with Samuel Vaughn, the silence stretching between them like something alive. "You do not have to stay," Samuel said. He was propped against his pillows, his injured leg elevated, his face still pale but with better color than before. "I am sure you have better things to do than nurse a clumsy cowboy." "The wagon axle broke," Elena said. She had heard the men talking about it. "That is not clumsiness. That is bad luck." She moved around his kitchen, finding a pot to heat water, locating coffee and the makings of a simple meal. "When did you last eat?" "This morning, I think, before I headed into town." Elena made coffee and fried eggs with bacon she found in his icebox, along with bread that was only a day old. She brought it to him on a tray, watching as he ate with the hunger of a man who had been working hard all day. While he ate, she explored the house, noting the neat way everything was organized, the absence of dust or disorder. This was the home of a man who took care of things, who valued order and routine. "You keep a clean house," she observed, returning to sit in the chair beside his bed. "Habit from my mother," Samuel said. "She always said that just because we are working folks does not mean we have to live like animals. After she died, I kept up with it. Seemed like a way to honor her memory." They talked through the evening, tentative at first but gradually more comfortable. Samuel told her about his parents, about learning to run the ranch, about the satisfaction of working the land and raising good horses. Elena shared carefully edited versions of her own life, speaking of Portland but not of what had happened there, mentioning her family but not their rejection. She could feel Samuel's curiosity, but he did not push, did not demand explanations she was not ready to give. She stayed that night, sleeping in the chair despite Samuel's protests that she should take the spare room. In the morning, she changed his bandages and was relieved to see no signs of infection. The wound looked clean, the stitches holding well. She made breakfast, checked on the animals, and then reluctantly said she needed to return to town for work. "Will you come back?" Samuel asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that made Elena's chest tighten. "I will check on you tomorrow," she promised. "Make sure you are not being foolish about staying off that leg." She came back the next day, and the day after that, and the one after that. Each visit lasted a little longer, the conversations growing deeper and more personal. Samuel told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to breed horses that were known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. Elena found herself talking about her love of reading, about the books she had devoured as a child, about the stories that had provided escape from a difficult home life. By the end of the first week, Samuel was moving around on crutches, insisting on checking on his horses despite Elena's protests. She followed him to the barn, watching as he ran his hands over each animal, speaking to them in low, affectionate tones. There was a gentleness to him that surprised her, a kindness that extended to every living creature in his care. "Why have you never married?" Elena asked one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the wheat fields. It was a bold question, perhaps too bold, but their conversations had moved past superficial politeness. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose I never found anyone who felt right," he said finally. "My parents had something special. They really loved each other, supported each other. I always figured if I was going to marry, it should be like that. Better to be alone than to be with the wrong person." Elena understood that sentiment more than he knew. She had seen marriages of convenience and desperation, had watched women settle for men who treated them as property rather than partners. "That is a good way to think about it," she said softly. "What about you?" Samuel asked, turning to look at her. "Why are you not married?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena felt her throat tighten, felt the weight of all the things she had not told him pressing down on her chest. "My past is complicated," she said carefully. "There are things that would make me unsuitable for most men." "I do not believe that," Samuel said, and his voice was firm. "You are kind and skilled and smart. Any man would be lucky to have you." Elena wanted to believe him, but she knew better. She had seen what happened when people learned the truth about her. She had watched respect turn to horror, seen doors close and opportunities vanish. She could not bear to see that same change in Samuel's eyes, so she kept silent and let him believe she was someone she was not. The second week after the accident, Samuel was walking with only a slight limp, and Elena knew her excuse for visiting was running thin. She had continued working at the general store, but she spent every free moment at the ranch, helping with chores and cooking meals and simply existing in Samuel's presence. It was the closest she had felt to happy in 3 years, and the knowledge that it could not last was a constant ache beneath her ribs. On a Wednesday afternoon, as Elena was helping Samuel mend a section of fence, he stopped working and turned to her. "I need to tell you something," he said, and his expression was serious enough to make her heart skip. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her tools. "I have feelings for you, Elena. I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot keep pretending I do not. You make me laugh. You make me think. When you are not here, I find myself counting the hours until you come back. I do not know what brought you to Walla Walla or what you are running from, but I do know that I want you to stay. Not just for now, but for good." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She had dreamed of hearing such words, but now that they were spoken, they felt like knives. "Samuel, you do not know what you are saying. You do not know who I really am." "Then tell me," he said simply. "Tell me whatever it is that has you looking over your shoulder, whatever secret you think will change how I feel. Because I do not believe there is anything you could say that would make me stop caring about you." Elena looked at him standing there in the afternoon sun, so earnest and hopeful, and she knew she had to tell him the truth. She could not let him care for a version of her that did not exist. She could not build a foundation on lies. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak, telling him everything. She told him about the merchant's son, about the attack, about the gun and the trial and the verdict. She told him about her family's rejection, about the years of wandering, about the letter from her mother that said she would never be forgiven. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, Elena felt hollow and exhausted, her secret finally exposed to the light. She waited for him to tell her to leave, to look at her with the same disgust her father had shown. Instead, he stepped closer and took her hands in his. "Elena," he said quietly, "there is nothing to forgive. You are perfect now." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? You protected yourself from a man who was trying to hurt you. You did what you had to do to survive. That does not make you a murderer. That makes you brave." His grip on her hands tightened. "And even if you had done something truly wrong, even if you carried real guilt, it would not change how I feel. We all have things in our past we are not proud of. What matters is who we choose to be now today." Elena felt tears spill over, running hot down her cheeks. "My family said I was beyond redemption. The town said I was marked. How can you just dismiss all of that?" "Because I know you," Samuel said. "I have watched you be gentle with injured animals. I have seen you work until your hands bleed to help someone you barely know. I have listened to you talk about books and dreams and the kind of world you want to live in. That is who you are, Elena. Not what happened in one terrible moment 3 years ago." Elena wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. She had spent so long carrying the weight of shame and guilt, so long believing she was fundamentally broken, that his words felt like a foreign language. I do not know how to accept what you are saying, she whispered. Then let me help you learn, Samuel said. He released one of her hands to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. Stay here with me, not as someone passing through, but as someone who belongs. Let me show you every day that you deserve happiness and love and a future. Elena looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity, only warmth, only acceptance. Something in her chest cracked open, and she felt a rush of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. I want that, she said. I want that so much. Samuel smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Then it is settled. You are staying. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Elena felt the world shift beneath her feet. She had been drifting for so long, untethered and alone, and now she had found an anchor. When they pulled apart, she was smiling despite her tears. They stood there in the golden afternoon light, holding each other, and Elena felt something she had not experienced in 3 years. She felt hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and laughter and growing intimacy. Elena officially quit her job at the general store, much to Mrs. Henderson's delight once she understood the reason. Samuel Vaughn finally found himself a woman, she said, beaming. I always knew it would take someone special. Elena moved her few belongings to the ranch, taking over the spare room, though she and Samuel both knew it was a temporary arrangement. They were courting properly, mindful of appearances and their own desire to build something that would last. Samuel continued working his horses, and Elena discovered she had a natural talent for it. She was patient and gentle, and the animals responded to her with trust that surprised even Samuel. You have a gift, he told her one morning as she worked with a skittish mare. Most people try to dominate a horse, force it to obey. You listen to what it is telling you. Elena had never thought of herself as having gifts, but Samuel's faith in her was slowly reshaping how she saw herself. She began to believe that maybe she was more than her worst moment, that maybe she could build a life defined by more than a single tragedy. News of their courtship spread through Walla Walla quickly, as such things did in small towns. Most people seemed happy for Samuel, though Elena noticed some curious looks and whispered conversations. She braced herself for the inevitable moment when someone would recognize her name or connect her to the scandal in Portland. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. Perhaps she had traveled far enough, or perhaps enough time had elapsed that her story had faded from public consciousness. It was in late October when the past caught up with her. Elena was in town purchasing supplies when she saw a woman watching her from across the street. There was something familiar about her, something that made Elena's blood run cold. After a moment, she recognized her. Margaret Turner, the merchant's widow, standing there like a ghost made flesh. Elena's first instinct was to run, but her legs felt frozen. Margaret crossed the street, her black dress and severe expression exactly as Elena remembered from 3 years ago. I thought it was you, Margaret said, her voice hard. Elena Graves. I never forget a face, especially not the face of the woman who murdered my husband. People were starting to stare, drawn by the confrontation. Elena felt panic rising in her throat. Mrs. Turner, I am sorry for your loss, but the court ruled it was self-defense. The court was wrong, Margaret spat. You seduced my husband and then killed him when he rejected you. You are a manipulative liar, and I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of woman you are. Before Elena could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. That is enough. Samuel appeared beside Elena, his presence solid and protective. I do not know what your grievance is with Elena, madam, but I will not stand here and let you slander her character. Margaret turned her venom on Samuel. You are the rancher everyone talks about, Samuel Vaughn. Do you know what she did? Do you know she murdered a man in cold blood? I know that she defended herself against a man who attacked her, Samuel said calmly. "And I know that a judge heard all the evidence and agreed with that account. If you have evidence to the contrary, I suggest you take it to the proper authorities. Otherwise, I ask that you leave her alone." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "You are a fool if you believe her lies. She will destroy you just like she destroyed my family." "My family was destroyed by your husband's actions," Elena said, finding her voice. She was trembling, but she forced herself to stand straight. "I am sorry he died. I am sorry for the pain you have suffered, but I will not carry guilt for protecting myself from assault." The crowd had grown larger, people gathering to witness the confrontation. Elena could see speculation and judgment in some faces, curiosity in others. She waited for Samuel to realize the complication she had brought into his life, to step away and distance himself from her scandal. Instead, he took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture that was publicly unmistakable. "Elena is going to be my wife," Samuel said loudly, addressing the crowd as much as Margaret. "She is a good woman who survived something terrible and came out stronger for it. If anyone in this town has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." The crowd murmured, reactions mixed. Margaret stared at Samuel with undisguised contempt. "You will regret this," she said. "Mark my words." "The only thing I regret is that you have been carrying hatred for so long that it has poisoned you," Samuel replied. "I hope someday you find peace, Mrs. Turner, but you will not find it by tormenting Elena." Margaret turned and stalked away, her back rigid with rage. The crowd began to disperse, though Elena could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting. Samuel squeezed her hand. "Let us go home," he said gently. They rode back to the ranch in silence, Elena's mind spinning. Samuel had called her his future wife in front of half the town. He had defended her publicly, aligning himself with her despite knowing it might damage his reputation. When they arrived home, Elena finally broke down, sobs shaking her entire body. Samuel held her, letting her cry until she was exhausted. "I am so sorry," she gasped. "I have ruined everything. Margaret will tell everyone and people will look at you differently. They will think less of you for being with me." "I do not care what people think," Samuel said firmly. "I care about you, I care about us. Let them gossip, let them judge. We know the truth and that is all that matters." "But your business, your reputation in town," Elena protested. "Will survive just fine," Samuel said. "I have been part of this community for a long time. People know me. Some might be suspicious at first, but once they see how happy we are, once they see the kind of person you truly are, they will come around. And the ones who do not come around are not people whose opinions I value anyway." Elena looked at him through her tears. "When you said I was going to be your wife, did you mean it? Or were you just trying to make a point?" Samuel smiled. "I meant every word. I probably should have asked properly first, but I stand by it." He got down on one knee, still holding her hand. "Elena Graves, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you that you are worthy of love and happiness and every good thing this world has to offer?" Elena felt her heart swell until it seemed too large for her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Walla Walla. Some people stayed away, making their disapproval clear through absence. But others came, people who had gotten to know Elena through her work at the store, people who trusted Samuel's judgment, people who believed in second chances and redemption. Mrs. Henderson was there, beaming with pride. The blacksmith came with his wife and 3 children. The doctor attended, along with several ranching families from the surrounding area. Elena wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Samuel wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining as he watched her walk down the aisle. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Elena held her breath, half expecting Margaret Turner to appear. But the church remained silent, and the ceremony continued without interruption. "I, Samuel Vaughn, take you, Elena Graves, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Samuel said, his voice clear and strong. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, to be your partner and your friend, to see you for who you truly are and love every part of you." Elena's voice shook as she repeated her own vows, but she meant every word with an intensity that bordered on painful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget the watching crowd, forget everything except the feeling of his lips on hers and the knowledge that she finally belonged somewhere. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by various guests. There was music and dancing, laughter and celebration. Elena danced with Samuel as the sun set, her head resting against his chest, his arms solid around her waist. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. That night, after the guests had left and the tables had been cleared, Samuel carried Elena over the threshold of their home. She laughed at the traditional gesture, but there was something deeply meaningful about it, about being welcomed so completely into a life she had never dreamed she could have. They made love slowly and sweetly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care, and afterward, Elena lay in Samuel's arms feeling more at peace than she had in years. The first few months of marriage were not without challenges. Some people in town remained cold to Elena, crossing the street to avoid greeting her or pointedly excluding her from social gatherings. Margaret Turner left Walla Walla not long after the wedding, but her poison lingered in the minds of some. Elena felt the weight of judgment, the knowledge that people were watching and waiting for her to prove them right by failing somehow. But Samuel's faith never wavered. When Elena doubted herself, he reminded her of her strength. When she felt overwhelmed by the work of running the ranch, he taught her with patience and humor. When she woke from nightmares about the shooting, he held her and talked her back to calm. Gradually, Elena began to believe what he had told her that day by the fence. She began to understand that she was not defined by her worst moment, that she could be more than the scared girl who had pulled a trigger in desperation. She also discovered that she loved ranch life. She loved working with the horses, loved watching them respond to her touch and voice. She loved the physical labor, the way it tired her body and cleared her mind. She loved the vast sky and the rolling fields, the sense of space and freedom that the land provided. With Samuel, she built routines and traditions, small rituals that made the ranch feel like home. Sunday morning coffee on the porch, evening walks to check on the horses, reading aloud to each other before bed. Spring came, and with it new life on the ranch. 3 mares foaled, producing strong, healthy colts that Samuel was confident would fetch good prices. Elena helped with the births, staying up through the night to monitor the laboring mares, her hands gentle as she assisted with the delivery. Samuel watched her with open admiration, marveling at her natural skill. "You are a natural horsewoman," he told her after the 3rd successful birth. "I think we should make you an official partner in the business. This is as much your ranch as it is mine now." Elena was deeply touched by the gesture. To be considered a partner rather than just a wife, to have her contributions recognized and valued, meant more than Samuel probably realized. They shook on it formally, laughing at the seriousness of the gesture even as they both understood its importance. In May, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, noting the changes in her body, the queasiness in the mornings, the exhaustion that hit her in waves. When she told Samuel, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, whooping with joy. Then he immediately set her down, apologizing for being too rough, fussing over her as though she might break. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Elena laughed, but she was secretly charmed by his protective concern. The pregnancy was healthy but not easy. Elena continued working the ranch as long as she could, unwilling to let her condition make her useless. Samuel worried constantly, hovering and fretting until Elena gently but firmly told him to stop treating her like an invalid. Mrs. Henderson visited regularly, bringing food and advice and stories about her own 6 pregnancies. Other women in town began to warm to Elena as her condition became obvious, the reality of impending motherhood softening their judgment. Elena's body changed, swelling and shifting to accommodate the life growing inside her. She felt the baby's first movements in late summer, tiny flutters that grew stronger and more insistent as the weeks passed. Samuel would place his hand on her belly and talk to the baby, telling it about the ranch and the horses and the life they would have together. Elena would close her eyes and feel tears of gratitude slip down her cheeks. She had thought she would never have this, a family of her own, a future unburdened by the past. In early November, the contractions started. Samuel fetched the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Morrison, who had delivered half the babies in Walla Walla. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Elena endured it with gritted teeth and fierce determination, squeezing Samuel's hand until she thought she might break his fingers. When the baby finally arrived, the midwife announced it was a boy, healthy and strong with a good set of lungs based on the volume of his crying. Samuel held his son with shaking hands, his eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Elena, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Samuel's father, with the middle name of James. Thomas Samuel Vaughn, a tiny person with dark hair and his father's eyes, who had no idea how desperately wanted and loved he was. Elena nursed him while Samuel hovered, ready to help with anything she might need. She was exhausted, and sore and more in love than she had known was possible. The early months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Thomas was a demanding baby, waking frequently to nurse and crying lustily when he was displeased. Elena and Samuel took turns walking him, soothing him, changing his endless dirty diapers. They learned his rhythms and his preferences, becoming experts in the subtle language of their son. When Thomas smiled for the first time at 6 weeks old, they both cried with happiness. The community softened further toward Elena after Thomas's birth. Women who had been coolly polite became warmer, offering advice and hand-me-down clothes and casseroles when they knew Elena was too tired to cook. Men congratulated Samuel and teased him about sleepless nights. Gradually, Elena realized she was being accepted, not as the woman with a scandalous past, but as Samuel's wife and Thomas's mother, as a member of the community in her own right. One afternoon in early spring, when Thomas was about 5 months old, Elena took him into town for supplies. She was loading her purchases into the wagon when a woman approached her. Elena tensed, preparing for confrontation, but the woman's expression was friendly. "Mrs. Vaughn, my name is Catherine Mills. My husband and I run the farm east of your ranch. I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you properly to the area. I apologize for taking so long to do so." Elena relaxed slightly. "Thank you. That is kind of you." Catherine peered into the wagon where Thomas was sleeping in a basket. "What a beautiful baby. You and Samuel must be so proud." "We are," Elena said, and she could not keep the smile from her face. I also wanted to say something else, Catherine continued, her voice lowering. I know there has been talk about you, about your past. I want you to know that I do not put much stock in gossip. I judge people by their actions, by how they treat others. And from what I have seen, you are a good woman who loves her family and works hard. That is all that matters to me. Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, she managed. That means more than you know. Catherine smiled. We should have tea sometime. I would like to get to know you better. They did have tea, and it was the beginning of a real friendship, the first Elena had allowed herself in years. Catherine was funny and practical, with a dry sense of humor and no patience for pretense. She had 3 children of her own, and a wealth of advice about parenting and ranching and navigating the social complexities of a small town. Through Catherine, Elena met other women, forming connections and building a support network that made life in Walla Walla feel less isolating. As Thomas grew, the ranch thrived. Samuel's breeding program produced horses that were indeed becoming known for their quality, and buyers came from across the territory to purchase his stock. Elena proved to have excellent instincts for matching horses to potential buyers, able to assess both the animal's temperament and the rider's needs. Together, she and Samuel made a formidable team, their skills complementing each other perfectly. Thomas took his first steps at 11 months, stumbling between his parents with a delighted laugh. He said his first words shortly after, a proud "Dada" that made Samuel beam with pride. Elena pretended to be offended, but she was secretly charmed by the bond between father and son. Samuel was a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching Thomas about the ranch and the animals with gentle enthusiasm. When Thomas was 2 years old, Elena discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect or perhaps because her body had learned the process. Their daughter, Catherine Sarah, was born on a clear autumn day in October. She had Elena's dark hair and a calm disposition that was markedly different from her brother's energetic temperament. Their family felt complete with 2 children, the house filled with noise and laughter, and the controlled chaos that comes with young ones. Elena would sometimes pause in her work to simply look at her life, at Samuel playing with Thomas in the yard or rocking Catherine to sleep, at the ranch they had built together, at the community that had gradually accepted her. She would think about that day when she had stood at the edge of Walla Walla, weighted down by her past and convinced she would never be forgiven. She would remember Samuel's words, "There is nothing to forgive. You are perfect now," and she would feel gratitude so intense it was almost painful. Years passed in the way they do, marked by small moments and big milestones. Thomas started school and proved to be bright and curious. Catherine followed 3 years later, shy but determined. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing Samuel and Elena to expand their operations and hire help when the work became too much for 2 people to manage alone. They added cattle to their holdings, diversifying in case the horse market ever declined. Elena never forgot her past, but it ceased to define her present. She thought sometimes about her family in Portland, wondering if her sisters had married, if her father had finally drunk himself to death, if her mother had regretted those final cruel words before consumption took her. She had written letters over the years, attempting reconciliation, but they had gone unanswered. Eventually, she stopped trying. Her family now was Samuel and Thomas and Catherine, was the friends she had made in Walla Walla, was the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel gave Elena a gift. It was a small wooden box, carefully carved with her initials on the lid. Inside was a new letter, written in Samuel's careful hand. "My dearest Elena," it read. 10 years ago, I married the bravest woman I have ever known. You took a life that had been shattered and put it back together piece by piece. You built a home and a family from nothing but determination and love. You are the most perfect partner I could have asked for, and I thank God every day that a broken wagon brought us together. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Forever yours, Samuel. Elena read it through tears, then folded it carefully and placed it in the box. She took out the old letter, the one from her mother that said she would never be forgiven, and read it one last time. Then she walked to the fireplace and threw it into the flames. She watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash, watched the words that had haunted her for so long disappear into smoke. "What was that?" Samuel asked, coming to stand beside her. "The past," Elena said simply. She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "I do not need it anymore. I have everything I need right here." Samuel kissed her, soft and sweet, and Elena leaned into him, feeling the strength of his arms around her, the steady beat of his heart against hers. Through the window, she could see Thomas and Catherine playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening air. The sun was setting over the wheat fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and deep purple. This was her life now. Not the life she had imagined as a young girl in Portland, not the life her family had wanted for her, but something infinitely better, because it was built on honesty and acceptance and real love. She was Elena Vaughn, rancher and mother and wife, a woman who had survived and thrived, who had learned that forgiveness started with forgiving yourself, that perfection was not about being flawless but about being fully, authentically human. The ranch continued to be their life's work and their joy. Thomas grew into a fine young man who loved the land as much as his parents did, who had his father's steadiness and his mother's intuition with horses. Catherine became a skilled rider and sharp businesswoman, helping to expand their breeding operation and establish connections with buyers in California and Oregon. When Thomas was 20 and Catherine 17, Samuel and Elena sat them down for a serious conversation about the future of the ranch. "This place is yours as much as it is ours," Samuel said. "We built it together as a family, and we want you both to know that it will be your inheritance. But more than that, we hope it will be your legacy, something you choose rather than something forced upon you." Both children assured them that they wanted nothing more than to continue the family business, to carry forward what their parents had started. Elena felt pride swell in her chest, knowing that her children had the choices she had never had, that they were free to pursue their dreams in a way she had not been. As they aged, Samuel's hair turned silver and his movements became slightly stiffer, the result of a lifetime of hard work. Elena found lines around her eyes and threads of gray in her dark hair. But they aged together, supporting each other through the inevitable aches and changes, finding new ways to be intimate and connected as their bodies shifted. Their love deepened rather than faded, rooted in years of shared experience and mutual respect. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch as they had when they were young, watching the sun set over the land they had worked together. Samuel would take Elena's hand, running his thumb over her knuckles in a gesture so familiar it had become unconscious. "No regrets?" he would ask sometimes. "Not a single one," Elena would always reply, and she meant it with her whole heart. She thought sometimes about that first conversation by the fence, when she had confessed her past and waited for rejection. She thought about Samuel's response, the way he had looked at her with such certainty and said those words that had changed everything. "There is nothing to forgive. You are perfect now." At the time, she had not believed him. It had taken years to internalize that truth, to understand that she was worthy of love and happiness despite her past. But sitting there on the porch with her husband beside her, her children grown and thriving, her life full of purpose and joy, Elena finally, completely believed it. She was not perfect in any objective sense. She made mistakes. She had bad days. She sometimes lost her temper or said the wrong thing. But she was perfect for this life, for this family, for this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway. When Thomas married a sweet-natured woman named Mary from a neighboring ranch, Elena and Samuel became grandparents to 3 boisterous grandchildren who filled the house with noise and energy. Catherine eventually married as well, to a horse trainer from Oregon who fit seamlessly into the family business. More grandchildren followed, 6 in total, and the ranch that had once been a refuge for 2 broken people became a gathering place for multiple generations. Elena taught her grandchildren to ride, just as she had taught their parents. She told them stories, carefully edited versions of her own past that emphasized resilience and second chances. She made sure they knew that mistakes did not define a person, that what mattered was how you recovered and grew. Samuel would watch her with the children and feel his heart swell with love for this woman who had transformed his life so completely. As they entered their 70s, Samuel and Elena gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting Thomas and Catherine to run things while they enjoyed a slower pace. They traveled a bit, visiting places they had always wanted to see, making memories while they still could. But they always returned to the ranch, to the land that had been their home for more than 50 years. On their 55th wedding anniversary, the family threw a celebration. Children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends from throughout the territory. There was food and music and dancing, stories and laughter and tears of joy. Elena wore a new dress in the same blue as her wedding gown, and Samuel wore his best suit, and they renewed their vows in front of everyone they loved. I, Samuel Vaughn, still take you, Elena Graves Vaughn, to be my wife, Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. I promised 55 years ago to love you for all my days, and I have kept that promise. You have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. I would choose you again and again in every lifetime. Elena's voice shook as she replied, I, Elena Vaughn, still take you, Samuel, to be my husband. You saw me when I was lost and told me I was found. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. You gave me a home and a family and a life beyond my wildest dreams. I love you more than words can express, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They kissed while their family cheered, and Elena felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt on their first wedding day, proof that some things never fade, that real love only grows stronger with time. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January morning in his 78th year. Elena woke to find him still and silent beside her, a small smile on his face, as though he had died while dreaming of something pleasant. The grief was immense and overwhelming, a wave that threatened to pull her under. For weeks, she moved through the world in a fog, unable to quite believe that he was really gone. But gradually, supported by her children and grandchildren, Elena found a way to keep living. She remained on the ranch, refusing to leave the place where she and Samuel had built their life together. She continued working with the horses, finding comfort in their warm breath and soft eyes. She told stories about Samuel to her grandchildren, keeping his memory alive through words and laughter. Elena lived for another 5 years after Samuel's death, years filled with both sorrow and joy. She watched more grandchildren be born, watched the ranch continue to thrive under Thomas and Catherine's management, watched the legacy she and Samuel had built endure and grow. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch and talk to Samuel as though he were still there beside her, updating him on the family and the horses and the daily happenings of ranch life. When Elena died at the age of 81, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were about Samuel. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered. "Tell him I kept my promise. Tell him I loved him every single day." She was buried beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so vast and blue it seemed to go on forever. The funeral was attended by dozens of people, proof of the life Elena had lived and the community she had been part of for more than 6 decades. The priest spoke about redemption and second chances, about the power of love to transform and heal. Thomas and Catherine stood together at their mother's grave, remembering the woman who had taught them about resilience and courage, who had built a life from nothing and left behind a legacy of love. They told their own children stories about Elena and Samuel, about the ranch and the horses and the love story that had started with 7 words. "There is nothing to forgive. You are perfect now." And on summer evenings, when the light slanted gold across the wheat fields and the horses whinnied softly in the barn, if you stood very still and listened carefully, you could almost hear laughter carried on the wind, 2 voices intertwined, speaking the language of a love that had transcended judgment and time and even death itself. The ranch stood as a testament to what they had built together, a place where broken things could be mended and lost people could find their way home, where the past was acknowledged but did not dictate the future, where forgiveness was freely given and love was the foundation of everything.